that's our 2012 showreel. What I want to talk about is how we got to this point, how we got to work on all these cool projects, because this wasn't, going from 2009 to 2012 as a showreel, and the stuff we've got for 2013 is bloody amazing. We can't talk about it yet. It's been quite a journey. So, by the way, the lovely ethereal rock music was provided by our lead artist, Pete Thompson, who also plays in a band as well as paints cool art. What an awesome guy. I wish I was him. It's cool. So, waking up with our hangovers from our trip to the pub, I set some wheels in motion, I got the finance together, I'll cover all of this as we go along. But our first day at work was quite a wake-up call. We started in this fairly crappy small office that had no air conditioning, it had bars on the windows, it had this big Victorian radio that we could not turn off. It was just kicking out heat the whole time we were there. And worst of all, the room smelled a bit yeasty. And the yeastiness became a problem because Pete and Colin thought it was Steve. And Steve's like a big, hairy developer type with a huge beard. And they were like, I think it's Steve. So I thought, God, we've just started our first week in our new company and I'm already going to have a personal hygiene conversation with somebody. It's not cool, it's not the best way to start. But luckily, before I offended poor Steve, who actually smells beautiful, I realised that the carpet in the corner of the office was wet and the building had a little leak. But hey. So, first day, we're really excited, and we managed to get going on our first project pretty quickly, which was Driver San Francisco. We did UI design for this game, we did marketing artwork, we did concept art, and it was really the first, the proof, that we could get a job at least, get some work. So we were really pleased, and then shortly after that we started working on Mortal Kombat for NetherRealm, and that relationship with NetherRealm has continued. We've worked with those guys for a long time, and they're a good bunch. They're all ex-Midway guys, obviously, as well. And then we worked on Aragorn's Quest, and we worked on Enslaved, the Ninja Theory, which is a local company to Cambridge. And by December 2009, we'd made a little bit of money, and we thought, look, should we pocket that money, or should we spend it on moving to a better office? And so we moved to our next office almost within 2 months of only getting started as a company, which was just over the road in the International Business Centre. As you can see, we are not that impressed, but it was a step up from where we were before. You'll also notice at this point I have full head of hair. It's interesting. That ties into the whole company success versus hair, obviously. We worked on Connectimals with Frontier, worked on Detonation for Sony, and then in March 2010, we scored, which would probably be still to this day one of our biggest projects. You know, Atomhawk, working with the team employed by Jacob Rowley to develop her online interactive experience. And it was a very interesting way that came about, and I'll talk about that as I go further on, because it's all about connections, and connections are the most important thing in industry. You know, I can't stress that enough. So off the back of all of that, we managed to grow the team a little bit. We hired Amy, who's our production manager. We hired Dan, who's a graduate, really talented guy, and Steph from France. And things were starting to come together. And that summer, we actually stopped working 14-hour days and knocked it back to 10-hour days, 11-hour days, and managed to actually get out and have a bit of fun. Then we started working on Dead Island, and at that point, obviously, Dead Island wasn't, you know, when we started working on it, it wasn't a huge success. You know, it was an unknown game that we were starting to work on, and for that we provided concept art, we did all the advertising artwork for Dead Island, and you know, it came out and it was a huge success. Actually, in the month that Dead Island came out, in the top 5 UK game charts, we had Dead Island, we had Drive to San Francisco, and Mortal Kombat. So for us, it was amazing to be like, you know, not even a year old as a company yet, and have 3 games in the top 5 that we'd worked on. It was just awesome. And we grew the team some more, so we hired Charlie, we hired, we brought Colin in, and you know, we grew the team out. So the office expanded, we knocked a wall down, we grew into the space, but still, you know, it's very much a startup company. You'll also notice that this is when things started to go a bit wrong with my hair as well, just a little shiny. We worked on Doctor Who, the adventure games with Sumo, we worked on Connect Sports with Rare, and in March 2011, I had a surprise call from a book publisher called 3D Total, who do a lot of industry sort of art training books, asking us if we would be interested in doing an art book of all of our designs, and obviously we jumped at the chance. And this was like the perfect, looking back, stealth promo asset. You know, when you think about like raising your profile and all that kind of stuff, rather than actually advertising in magazines, I had a book printed and it was published by somebody else, and they gave me 200 copies. And with that 200 copies, I just went through all of the people who were like art directors and creative directors at all of the game studios and sent them a book with a letter saying, "Hi, how's it going? Please want to do our book." And it was like the best calling card, superb. So really happy. By the end of 2011, this is us at the Northeast Business Awards. We were nominated for Newcomer of the Year, and it was a really good event. We drank too many Jaeger bombs that night. It was great. But increased success, decrease in hair, very strange, and that was pretty much the end. I had to shave it off after that. This is us in 2011. We moved to an even bigger space, but we filled that within 6 months. It was full. And then at 3 years old, we worked on all of these titles, and we moved into this building, which is the building we're in now. It's the Northern Design Centre in Gateshead. Custom built, beautiful building, enough room for about 30 staff. It's got everything we need. So for us, this is where we're staying now for the foreseeable future. And that's my lovely team. I just got another reel of more recent stuff that we've worked on. about how we got there and the things I've learned on the way. And I couldn't possibly tell you everything, so at the end, feel free to quiz me. So it looks simple. I think it looks simple when you present it. You guys might not think so. It looks simple, but I think the key thing in starting a company or starting any project, it's not necessarily a company. So I keep referring back to my company, but actually some of you may have projects that you're working on. Some of you may be trying to change a career. Some of you might be trying to build a career. And all of these things do kind of apply to anything we're doing. So, we needed to decide on our services. We needed to define what the business is going to be, how much we charge, who are our competitors, how are we actually going to make money. We needed to find finance to get the company off the ground. We needed to find premises, and most importantly, we needed to find some clients. We needed to start working. Because even though, even if we raised the finance, it would have gone pretty quickly if we didn't find a client. I've always believed in something, I don't know where I picked it up, but it's succeed or fail, or whatever you do it quickly. And I think this just summed it up, really. I think you need to know whether something's not going to work as quick as possible so you can start wasting your time on it. And that really is something, it's a gem, always remember that when you're doing anything. So starting the company, we had to do a business plan. I'm an artist, yes, I'm an artist who's done some management, but, I've always led from example, I've always been at the front of the team, doing sketches myself, doing painting, showing them where I want to take the project. I'm not a businessman, I have no training whatsoever in that space, and so I've had to learn everything as I go along. And this was the most daunting task, putting this business plan together. Luckily, there's a ton of stuff on the internet, just loads of forms and examples and all the rest of it. And I just spent about a week just reading through stuff on the internet, trying to figure out what was right, what was wrong, and sort of just taking what I could. Some of it is absolutely outrageously bad, but there is some gems on there. And this is the core thing. It's the breakdown of headings that you would have in a business plan, and from this, I was able to say, okay, I can focus on these subjects. So finance, the big thing, and for me as an artist, that was just it was really bad. I was hooked up. Luckily, what you'll find in any area that you're in, you'll have it in Cambridge as well, is you have these things called regional development agencies, and they vary in the quality of service they can give you. Business Link is a similar thing. And so what I did was get together with the Regional Development Agency, which is Tyne and Weir Development Company, and with Business Link. And I basically said, this is what I want to do. And I ended up with some very low down the chain people who didn't really know that much about starting a business and couldn't really help. But luckily, during the course of Midway closing down, we'd actually been talking about doing a management buyout. And our studio head, a chap called Craig Duncan, who now runs Rare's studio, he had already spoken to quite senior people in Business Link and in Tyne and Weir Development Company. And so he gave me their contact details. And when I got to speak to the people who actually knew what to do, things happened very quickly. They were very good. They hooked me up with all these different options, all of these different methods of finance, and made a ton of introductions. And I couldn't compliment them enough, really. So looking at money, I had an option of angel investors, regional development funds, which are the easiest money, as in there's very little sort of downside to it, but you've got to jump through quite a lot of hoops to qualify for regional development money. It's not as simple as an angel investor just saying, yeah, I'll give you the money, and there you go. Private investors, I mean, to be honest, how many of you would feel comfortable asking your family for money to start a business? Not many people. I think it's going a bit fast. So private investors is a difficult one. And then personal finance. I mean, if you've got the money, you can put that in and it'll help you get it off the ground. In our case, I ended up doing it in a number of ways. I managed to get a regional development match fund, which basically means that whatever you put in, they'll put in the same amount. And it's what they call a convertible loan, which is basically if your company fails to pay them back within 3 years, they take a percentage of the company as the payment. And in our case, the payment they wanted was 12%, so it seemed like pretty easy. And also, if you've not succeeded within 3 years, it's 12% of nothing really. So it's easy stuff. We got a grant for business investment. So there's this. The grant for business investment is if you start a company, the government will give you back 30% of your first year's wage costs at the end of the first year, which is pretty good, but you have to have made it to the end of the first year, and that's the catch, because they know that a lot of companies aren't going to succeed if they don't make it to the end of the first year, so there's a bit of a catch there. And then my own money, and you'll see this little car here, that was my baby, only 2 years old, and that's what I had to sell to raise the money to fund this venture. And there is always some personal sacrifice unless you just got to wait till you cash like that. And then premises, that was actually really easy. Gateshead Council have some good initiatives. Free office space in the first building. The first building used to be a mental institute. That's the one that smelled of yeast, but it was free. And it was free for 6 months, so it was great. And then pay subsequently more depending on which building you go into. And they'll have similar things down here in Cambridge if you ever want to start a business. You find out who your regional business manager is in your area, and it'll hook you up with incubator units. Something's winding there. Is it easy? No, it's all good. Okay, so first day at work, we're sitting there literally waiting for the phone to ring. People were calling us, and I was literally like, yeah, we're all crowded around as a group, picking up the phone, and it'd be somebody saying, do you want to buy, Edge magazine subscription or something like that. I mean, the first 2 weeks was pretty stressful before we got these projects within about 2 weeks of starting business. But to start with, we were literally sitting around designing logos, coming up with ideas for like what we were going to do about branding. And really, I felt it was almost like playing at running a company, because we had no work and we were sitting in this office, but we didn't actually have anything to do. We were just making it up as we went along. And I was putting on a really brave face with the team, like, yeah, this is going to be great. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, wow, 2 weeks in and we're just designing logos. This is not going very well. And we started working on our website, and getting that website done was the big leap for us. We started to actually get traffic into the company, work inquiries into the company that had nothing to do with contacts that we already had. And the secret with the website was not only to design something really nice, but also to contact all of the sort of forum groups. There's one called Concept Art World, there's 2D Artists, and basically try and get them to feature the website. So, in a games company that you might work for, they'll have a PR guy or a marketing guy to do that. But we were actually doing it ourselves. And even Pete, our lead artist, was calling up, different websites and saying, would you feature our website as a special or something? And actually, you'd be surprised when you're a startup. There's so much goodwill, and that goodwill is a key thing when you start any kind of venture. You use it because people will help you if you show that you're tenacious about what you're trying to make happen. And then from there, we built a pretty good social following. We built our Facebook page. We built put all our demo videos on YouTube. And I think the key thing with running any business is that your social media fans, as I would sort of call them, are not your customers, right? Unless you're actually running like a shop that's selling products to the general public, they're not your customers. But at the same time, they are your evangelists. And it's almost like by growing them and giving them news and giving them things to get excited about, they then go and propagate the word. And it's amazing, like how much support we've had from our fans. On our Facebook page, we're constantly getting people saying, oh, I bought the book, I love it, I've seen this artwork somewhere, I love it. And it's just so supportive of the team. We had one of the guys in Brazil took one of our concepts and built it as a 3D scene. and then he posted it to me as an email, and he said, I hope you don't mind, I hope I'm not infringing your copyright, but I just used your concept art to build this VDC. And it was bloody amazing. So I put it on our Facebook site and said, this is what somebody did from one of our pieces of work. And then someone I know then employed him because they liked what he was doing. He was out of work at the time. So it was just really nice to see those kind of interactions happening. And then the big thing, the whole sort of public relations drive. Once we got the business underway and we started to do quite a lot of work, one of the key things, another sort of key thing to the, like the succeed or fail quickly, is to run the company. You can't work for the company, you have to work on the company. And as an artist and an art director, that was the most painful decision I've made in my entire career. It was basically, do I continue to sit here and be part of the team, painting images and creating cool artwork, or do I step out of that and truly become an MD and run the company? And for a long time I thought, well, maybe we should hire someone in to do that. But one of the interesting things I found is that as a creative, if you're wanting to provide a service to someone else, they don't want to talk to a business development guy, and they don't want to talk to a salesman. They want to talk to the creator. And it's a bit like, the best analogy I've got is, if you imagine you're doing up a house, right, and you've got a guy who works in a workshop and makes beautiful handmade furniture, and whenever you go in there, he's there with his team, they're working around this furniture, and you get a good vibe about that because you can see the craft and you feel that it's worth paying for this guy's time because he's a master craftsman. Then you put the same team making furniture in a factory, and you have a salesman on the front door, and you immediately just think Barker and Stonehouse or MFI or whatever. And so straight away it takes away that connection, and you're not prepared to pay as much for it because it's not as bespoke. And so one of the things I learned on the way is definitely that, as a creative, you can't package it in a box and sell it. You have to work with the client and talk to them all the time and show them that you understand and show them that what you're doing for them is bespoke. And that goes the same for if you're a freelancer, or even if you're going for a job interview. You can't just rock up to the job interview and say, yeah, I'm an artist and I can do that, that's fine, I'm on a program, I can do that. You have to actually know a bit about the company. You have to really be able to sit there in an interview and say to them, this is what I can do for you, and this is what my skill set is, and this is how I fit in your team. Because you're showing that you're paying attention and that you really care about what they're doing, and that's what people want. So anyway, I went out to all of the different trade shows, all over the world really, just trying to see what was going on, and it was all really about market analysis, if anything. The first time I went to all of these trade shows, I had virtually no meetings, I didn't know anybody, I just went to talks, I went to the Game Connection events, I watched what people were doing, I watched what our competitors were doing, and I kind of just got an idea of where we were at. And there's a group in the UK, a government agency called UK Trade and Investment, and they will, when you first start a business, actually pay 50% of the cost of you doing this. So you enroll for that, and then basically you can bill back the cost of it. So in the first year of business, I spent £20,000 on travel, and I was staying in pretty ropey hotels and flying economy, but I just went everywhere to see what the world was like and what we could do within it. And then in the second year, I continued to do that. I also talked at a number of these events. So that was the other big thing is, if you think about it, if you're going to Canada and you want to get clients in Canada and they've never heard of you, the only way you can really sort of raise your profile there so they have heard of you is actually to go there and evangelize about what you do and be there at their events. So that was another big thing for us is that constant raising awareness of what we do is really important. So coming back to succeed or fail, early, what we realised in our first year of business was that actually of all of those things, this is all we needed to do. These are the things we're the best at, and it comes down to specialism. People don't want to work with a company that does everything because they feel that you're not good at anything. You must just be a jack of all trades. And the same thing goes for if you're a freelancer or an employee. I think the only time as an employee that you can go into a company and do all of these things is when you're a graduate. You know, when you're a graduate and the company's looking for someone that they can shape into a number of different roles, then you want to go in there with a really broad range and say these are the things I can do. But once you're there in business, you want to specialise as quickly as you can. It raises your value if you're a specialist. So this is just a summary of the stuff that I've sort of learned on the way. You need to decide what you want to be good at. And when I say what you want to be good at, nobody who starts a business will stay in that business if they hate doing what they're doing. It doesn't matter if it makes £1 million a week. You'll get fed up with it pretty quickly. And I've got a number of friends who left university and went to work for management consultancy firms, and they were making 120 grand a year, 150 grand a year, massive bonuses, and ultimately they all left within 2 or 3 years, because it's not the money. You've got to enjoy what you're doing. And so in many ways you have to sort of look inside yourself and say, this is what I want to do. But then the next thing down is the caveat. You have to become good at it pretty quickly. And if you're not good at it, you have to realise you're not good at it and move on. Because the number of people I've seen, particularly as artists, who apply for jobs, and they've maybe they say they've got 5 years experience, and you look at their work and you think they will never make it as a professional, and they haven't realised that. And so at what point do you sort of say to them, you should stop, or do you just let them carry on with the illusion? There's no way of knowing really. You've got to market yourself, and that goes the same for starting a company, working as a freelancer, taking on a job. You've got to make contacts, you've got to make opportunities. So one thing I was told by a colleague of mine, who's a director of a company, is for every person you meet, you create a new opportunity. And whether or not that person has anything to do with what you're working on at the time, the best thing to do is get along with people, introduce yourself, have fun, and you never know, a year down the line, you suddenly go, oh, I remember that musician I met at a party, he seemed like a really good guy, I need some music doing for this track, I'll give him a call. And you see, you create these opportunities through networking. And you've got to be accessible, and that comes back to the website of, if people can find you easily, and whether that's, through the web or through forums or through word of mouth, you've got to constantly spread that. You've got to raise your profile. The next thing is never see yourself as number one. And that was a really good tip I had from someone who's been running companies who'd run several successful companies. He was basically saying that even if you are number one, always see yourself as number two, because as soon as you become number one, you just tend to kick back and think, oh, I've already made it, I don't need to work hard at this anymore. And as soon as you do that, it's over. And the same goes again in your job. If you think about it, if you have a job and you think, I'm the best person in this studio, I'm the best character artist there is, or I'm the best programmer, pretty soon you'll get lazy. You need to constantly be looking at the people around you and thinking, God, they're better than me. He's better than me. I should be as good as him. I need to practice harder to be as good as him. And I think if you're at a company that isn't like that, you really are the best, you've got to move on, because ultimately, you need to be constantly challenged to be the best. And I think one of the things one of my artists, Colin Kruger, one of the founding members of the company, said about dealing with being creative on demand. So he was saying that he found it very hard when I would come in the mornings and just say, be creative, it's 9 AM, you've got to do this. Like by the end of the day, we've got to deliver this to the client every single day. You couldn't have an off day because every day is a deadline day. And so what he does is he goes to a load of websites of really great digital artists and traditional artists, and he looks at their work for like 20 minutes, and he gets them all fired up because he looks at it and goes, God, I'm not as good as this guy, I'm not as good as this guy, I'm not as good as this guy, and that makes him go, right, I'm doing it, let's go. And that's his method of dealing with it. Speaking to your clients, so again, that's the whole thing of building that relationship of you being a craftsman and a creator rather than a salesman. You've got to let them into your creative process. and you've got to help understand what they're trying to deliver to the world. You know, quite often your client will have an idea, and you might not be an artist, he or she might not be able to communicate that idea. So you have to drag it out of them, and with experience you start to get to understand that it's not as much about what they say, it's as much about what they don't say. And you have to kind of like, you know, almost play the, is it this, is it that, is it this game? And that will get all that information from them. And the last thing again with specialise, which I said earlier, you know, it's much more appealing in industry if you are the best character modeler in the world, then you are quite good at characters and quite good at environments and quite good at doing cars. I mean, that kind of thing works if you're a really low-end sort of company that wants to do a lot of different things cheaply. But if you want to be a premium paid person in the industry, you need to be the best at something, and people will pay a premium for that. So what next for Atomhawk as a company? Because obviously, you know, we've had nearly four good years, but I've got to keep going. I've got to keep pushing onwards and upwards. You can't, you know, a company that isn't growing is a company that's basically stagnating.
So if you want to try, if you don't have more business,
Yes,
just the 60 helps.
Oh yeah, okay. Is it really bad? Okay. It's Windows.
We can plug it back.
It's cool, no worries. Okay, so areas that we're moving into, obviously we've got these skills as a design company. We were born in the games industry, but we can actually span those skills out into other industries. So what I've been looking at now is diversifying into other areas that are similar, but not the same. And that's for two reasons. One is, as I'm sure, how many of you guys work in the games industry? So you all know it's unstable. I bet you've all lost your jobs at least once. And that is just the way the industry is. It's young and it's constantly turning over. And for us, that's kind of all right because we're separated in some ways from that turmoil. But it still happens, you know, one minute we've got a contract with a customer, and then the next minute they're being closed, and so, you know, that contract is brought to an end. And so by diversifying into other industries, we bring stability, but also growth as well at the same time. And one of the big things for us is we started off with just Steve doing UI design and doing, you know, so you saw the UI he did for Enslaved. I mean, that was one of the first things we did for Ninja Theory. And our skills as UI designers of video games is so niche. I mean, you know, most studios have one UI guy who sits on his own in the corner and holds the fort for UI. You know, he'll do a whole game on his own. And a lot of studios don't even have that guy. You know, the UI is done by a programmer, or it's done by an artist who just gets roped into doing the UI at the end. But with touchscreen becoming such a big thing, and I think also with games becoming more web-focused now and having interactivity with the web and social media, the concept of user experience has become like a really hot topic for games now, and also for crossover touchscreen platforms. And so we started doing a lot of work in that space, and that team that started off as just Steve is now 3 people. And I think that's where the big growth is for us as a studio, is interactive design. And we've just worked on a tablet application for telling stories on new platforms. We've just worked on a touchscreen coffee vending machine for Costa. And believe it or not, they put a 24-inch flat screen touchscreen on their new coffee machine. 24-inch mounted portrait. Rich graphics, it's Intel powered, it's got, you know, literally you could play games on this thing. And so they wanted a UI that looked like something you would expect to see in a game. It's all, when you touch every button, the button reacts and fades out and transitions to the next screen. We just designed that from them. They announced it at the NRF conference. If you do a search on YouTube for Costa NRF machine or whatever, you'll find some footage of that. And obviously as well, as creatives, one of the biggest things we miss, having stepped Atomhawk, is creating our own stuff, things that come from our minds. And I think it's quite hard to sort of maybe understand that externally looking in, because we've got to work on all of these great projects. And we have a degree of creative input into those projects, but they're not our projects. And so, the artists in the studio need to retain that sharpness that comes from creating something from scratch, from your own mind. And so we've been developing a project called The Realm, which started 2 years ago, and it's been ongoing. We've been using downtime in the company. And this is another tip is, all companies have downtime. You can't keep everybody busy every minute of every day. But if you set up a project, and Google do this, Google have tons of projects internally that people can just work on when they're not busy. Setting up an internal project meant that we were able to harness all of that downtime into something. And it took 2 years, but we've now got to the point where this project is going to launch on Kickstarter next month. So it's going to be a touchscreen, point-and-click adventure game on PC and on tablet. And the idea is we're going to use that rich, high-end 2D artwork that my team is known for to create all of the backgrounds, and then we're going to have some 3D characters walking in front of these backgrounds. And it will be a really high-end experience. And so, for the Realm project, we started looking at, one of my things is I'm very interested in how you not just create artwork, but also how you create something that appeals to certain audiences. And for a project like this, I felt that you really have to have a really broad age range appeal. You have to appeal to, you want fathers and mothers to be able to play this with their kids, but at the same time you want teenagers to play it and not feel like they're being a child. And you want grannies to be able to play it on their iPad as well. So we looked at companies like Disney, and in some ways, in the lesser ways, DreamWorks, maybe not quite as good as Disney, at doing this, but we looked at the way they create something that works on many levels. And we looked at also books that appeal to children and to adults. So something like The Hunger Games, for example, it's aspirational for a child. They look at it and they go, oh, it's danger, it's action, it's got all these things. But an adult looks at it and feels almost nostalgia for being a teen. So it kind of works on many levels. And then we also we wanted to create something with heart, something that really creates an emotional attachment. You'll have all met people, or you will be fans of Japanese, Studio Ghibli or games like Ico. And people who play these games or are into these kind of TV shows or films are really adamant. Their love for these things is intense. They really feel a connection with it because they love the characters. And so we looked at Miyazaki's work, we looked at Studio Ghibli, and wanted to try and create that connection. We looked at some games as well, so Ico, Record Sword, Machinarium, Sword and Sorcery. These are the type of game we want to make, an adventure game. That's just some of the artwork we created. So I've actually got our video that we put together for this, which is our sort of trailer. We'll play that now. Yeah, audio. confused. And I guess it's funny, somebody said to me recently, oh, you know, that must have cost a lot of money. Oh, what if it doesn't come off? I mean, this is the thing about succeed or fail. And even if we fail, the video and the assets we created and everything else is a great advertisement for the company anyway, you know. So it's about always thinking about what you can do with your time and trying to think about how many different stones you can kind of, you know, how many different birds you can hit with those stones at the same time. So anyway, I'm done with my talk. Has anyone got any questions? I wouldn't say so much outsource. I mean, I'd love to be able to keep creative control over everything we do, but I think ultimately, if we did this as a game, we wouldn't be able to do it in-house entirely. We'd probably do the key sort of high-end graphics end of it, and then we would direct other people, freelancers or other studios with a cheaper rate than we have to do it. Anyone else?
You mentioned that when you started after 2 weeks, you had like your first jobs, but how did you get them? I mean, if essentially you are 2 weeks old, nobody knows you, so did you go around all friends? Or?
No, I should have covered that actually. It is entirely who you know. The business is, the entertainment industry is hugely incestuous. You know, it is basically, so I would say in our first year of business, we didn't work with anyone who didn't already know. Because it was all through connections. And when I say no, that can be quite a tenuous connection. I mean, that can be literally someone I met while at a conference, or someone that I went for a job interview with like 5 years previous, but they were all people who I'd met face to face. And so that is the key connection. And actually, when you do business development, I found on average that when you try to build a new connection with someone to create a business partner, you'll email them, you might get no reply. You'll email them again, you might get a reply, they're not interested. You'll email them again or you'll call them because there's a conference and there's a reason why you want to meet up. If you're lucky, they'll say, yeah, all right, let's meet up for a coffee or a beer or whatever. You'll meet them. It'll be nice. You won't speak to them again for 6 months. Then you'll meet them by chance at a conference, and because you're not trying to organise a sales situation, you have a social chat. You know, you don't talk about work at all. You just have a chat and a laugh. Maybe 3 or 4 months after that, they'll give you a call and say, hey, do you want to do some work with us on this? So it literally is, it's like a 1 to 2 year cycle to bring a new client on board from scratch. I think there's a difference. So sometimes there'll be a client who literally has a need and it will be on Monday. And they will just call you up and say, can you get this done by Monday? Because otherwise their project's going to fail. And you say, yeah, and the deal is done. And you might never have met them. It will be done on a phone call. But that's pretty rare. You know, normally if you think, right, I want to work with company A and company B and company C, it's a long journey to get there with that stuff. And a lot of it is purely organic, and it's all about people. You know, ultimately, if you don't click with the people there, you'll never work with them. It's just a personalities thing. And, you know, if you're not compatible, you just got to sort of chalk it down to, you know, personalities and move on. Sure.
I'm currently putting together like a phone application one. I'm looking to bring in a couple of programs. From your experience, how did you like manage to source talent into your first visual team? And did you bring them in by offering them to pay them monthly or did you offer like shares?
Okay, so that's a good point. That's a really good point. When I started the company, I was very lucky actually. So I managed to raise 40 grand to start the company with, and that was through my own money and through match funding and through GDI grants. And 40 grand for 4 people was enough to keep us going for a few months before we would run out of cash. But I knew that Pete and Colin and Steve are really good. You know, they're really good guys, and ultimately, why should they hang around? You know, they can get jobs anywhere they like. I mean, I know they were invested creatively, but you know, when times get tough as a startup, and you're working until 11 o'clock at night, you just think, why am I doing this? And so I gave each of them 3% of the company. as an incentive to their shareholders, and incentivising people through shares is a really good point. I think it all comes down to how much money you have that you can pay them versus you know. So the problem is if you give everybody 20% of the company, right, because you can't afford to give them any salary, what happens if you make it really big? Suddenly you've given them 20% of everything. If your turnover is £5 million a year, you've given them £1 million a year. And so you have to think, like, you know, how much risk am I prepared to take as the owner of the company? Because ultimately, the more you give away in shares, the more you'll pay for it in the future. You know? Cool. And sourcing talent, I was just actually going to cover that. In the early years, it was really hard. Like year one, I mean, Steph, we were really lucky because basically we just posted on a forum that we were looking for an artist, and Steph was freelance at home, and he was really fed up with freelancing. He was ready for the next adventure. He was basically working from home. He didn't have anyone to talk to, and he just replied in the forum thread, "I'm interested," and that was how we did the deal. You know, like, I mean, we spoke to him on the phone, and he flew over to meet us, but it was done in that really weird way. And Dan was a graduate, and graduates are a great source for bringing in talent when you have no reputation. You just got to try and find your way through the massive amount of graduates who aren't any good to find real diamonds. You've got to put time in. Anything else? Sure.
You mentioned Kickstarter. I'm aware of the US, and also they're starting up here in the UK.
It's already started, yeah.
Yeah, it's already started. How is there an automatic connection between the two, or is it any good in the UK?
It's doing really well. I mean, there's actually a little article in here I was just reading earlier about how much has been raised in the UK so far. It's quite a lot, and it seems to be just as successful here in the UK as it was in the US.
Okay.
There's definitely
Is it a worldwide thing though? Is anyone from anywhere in the world can invest in it? I presume
I think
that's
so,
the way
yeah,
regular
I think so,
works.
yeah, it is, yeah.
Okay.
Otherwise, in the UK, we really struggle to hit anything with a decent budget. There's just not enough people.
It's taking the money out, which is local.
Yeah.
Yes, it's going for more local money. You're saying?
I think it's taking the money out into your British bank account, which is the problem if they didn't operate here.
Yeah.
But you can.
For the US one, yeah. That's why you can't work with the US one. They've started that over here. So it's basically an affiliate of theirs.
But it's the same people as far as I know.
Yeah.
But it seems to be doing very well. It is a minefield, and we've done a lot of analysis on what succeeds on Kickstarter and what doesn't. And there's certainly things like, for example, if you've got a retro game you're trying to relaunch, there's nostalgia there, and nostalgia makes people fund things. But recently there's been a backlash against millionaires going on there and asking for people's money when they've got plenty of their own. And people are getting a little bit sick in the Kickstarter circles of funding celebrities, basically industry celebrities with their products. So I think basically if you're a genuine person trying to launch a cool product and you really need the money, that's your best sort of angle, is to basically just be honest in your pitch materials that you know you need people's money to make that happen, because that's what the hardcore Kickstarter funders are about, is about helping creative projects happen that wouldn't have otherwise happened.
Right.
Anyone else?
I think that's it.
Cool.
Thanks very much.
Okay, there was.
I've done it.